Hi everyone, welcome back to our Bible study. Today, 2 Chronicles chapter 6. We're going to talk about Solomon's prayer at the dedication of the temple. The temple has finally been completed in Jerusalem. And like the other chapters that we've talked about in 2 Chronicles, this one has a parallel in 1 Kings. So if you already read 1 Kings, you already know about this. This does add a few extra details, but it's very, very similar. Solomon's reign spanned 40 years from approximately 1015 to 975 BC. Now, the temple was completed in his 11th year as king. The key figures in this chapter, first we've got Solomon, the third king over the United Kingdom of Israel and Judah, and then we have the assembly of Israel. So all of the people of the nation gathered in Jerusalem to celebrate this momentous occasion of the temple being completed. And now it could finally go into operation as the central place of worship for the entire nation. Now that takes us over to our map. Where was the central location? Where was the central location going to be located? Well, it was going to be located in the capital of the kingdom, which probably by now you know is Jerusalem. The temple was built on Mount Moriah, also known as Zion. As I mentioned, the bulk of this chapter is a record of Solomon's prayer at the dedication of the temple. I've got it broken down into two sections. The first is the first 11 verses. Solomon praises God for allowing him to be the one to build the temple. So Solomon blessed the entire congregation of Israel that had gathered there at the temple, and he blessed God in front of all of the people, and he spoke very fondly of his father's desire to build the temple, because originally it was David who wanted to build it, remember? Solomon worshiped God for keeping his promises to David, because even though David wasn't allowed to build the temple, God forbid him from doing it, he promised that he would have a son, Solomon, and that Solomon would be able to build the temple, and now that promise has been kept. Section number 2 is verses 12 through 42, Solomon's prayer at the dedication of the temple. So Solomon prayed to God with his hands outstretched in front of the altar of burnt offering, which was out in front of the temple proper. He asked God to fulfill his promises by blessing Judah and Israel and blessing their nation so long as their kings kept their end of the bargain and followed God and were obedient to his commands and to his law. You remember God's laws to the people of Israel were conditional. He said, if you're obedient to me, I will bless you. If you're not obedient to me, then punishment's going to come. Solomon acknowledged, and rightfully so, that God was too great to be housed in any man-made building, even a man-made building as special as the temple. But he still asked God to hear the prayers of the people that were directed towards that place and the prayers that were offered from that place. He asked God to punish the wicked and to vindicate the righteous so that their nation could be an upright nation and that justice could be done. He prayed that God would hear the prayers of foreigners who came to the temple seeking to know who God was. And by answering their prayers, God would show himself to be the true God of heaven and that he was superior to all of the false gods and foreign deities that these other nations worshipped. Now, a large section of Solomon's prayer feels almost prophetic, and if you're with us for our 2 Kings study, you'll probably know what I'm talking about. Solomon prayed for future forgiveness for his people. He prayed that if there was a time in the future when the people of Israel fell into sin, that if they repented and came to God with a contrite heart, that he would forgive them. And even more seemingly prophetic than that, he specifically asked the Lord to allow his people to return to the promised land if they repented after being taken captive by a foreign power. Now, again, if you were with us for 2 Kings, you'll know that actually happens to both Israel and Judah. They're taken captive by foreign powers. The people of Israel are taken captive by the Assyrians, the people of Judah to the nation of Babylon. And so the prayer seems very interesting. If you know the history of Judah, you'll know that eventually they did get to come back to the promised land. And so God did answer the prayer of Solomon that he prays here centuries before those events would take place. But that's all for another study. As for now, that is 2 Chronicles chapter 6. Now for our application section, a little bit political, a little bit spiritual. Great leaders know that their nations are dependent on God for future success, and that they acknowledge that they're going to need God's forgiveness for inevitable mistakes that they're going to make and their people are going to make in the future. Now, this sentiment is very rarely expressed in any modern government. but it's just as true today as it was during Solomon's day. I think undoubtedly our nations, our populations would be better off if we were regularly reminded of our dependence on God. There is this popular delusion that many leaders, many nations buy into that mankind is the primary force behind a nation's success. That mankind's innovation, their ingenuity, their military power is what leads a nation to success. But that delusion, and it is a delusion, is plunging many modern nations into confusion, into chaos, and into collapse. We need more leaders praying prayers like Solomon's prayer when he was dedicating the temple.